Many of you may know the story of Harold and the Purple Crayon. I think it's one of those stories that I read to my children quite frequently, trying to make them young, aspiring architects. And it's great in that we each get to sort of plan our own environment. At a very young age, I think we all become urban planners in some aspect, whether it be playing with Legos, playing with blocks. We reconfigure them and create them in a way where we define our own urban environment. And really, in the end, that's what makes architecture inspiring. That's what gets us motivated. That's what gets us going every day to deal with the clients and the difficulties that exist in everyday design. So at night, every night, Harold goes to sleep and he dreams and visions the world that he's left behind. And I think that's what we try to bring to this idea of domestic life. Our firm has been around for about 11 years. We've really cut our teeth in residential architecture. Many would attest it's a difficult part of our profession in that we deal with clients that are very demanding and very detail-oriented and occupy probably 1/1,000,000th of the building that Gordon just showed us, which gets an intense amount of design into that. Architecture itself it affects the built environment. We oftentimes like to think about how we can create a balance between our designs, no matter what their scale is, and how they sit in the environment, and how we can begin to understand the materiality, the balance of nature and space between indoors and outdoors, and how we can really begin to deal with this idea of filtered light. Many of you in the room probably live in Chicago if you live in an urban environment. This idea of how we were able to bring the outside in and create transparency and texture and definition is something that's very relevant, whether you're dealing with a living space, a bathroom space, or even a townhouse that may exist within the urban environment. For us, the idea of transparency and screening is our way of making a connection from the inside to out. And it allows us to create a level of privacy from the homeowners and users so that it becomes a more pleasant space to be in. And that's relevant both on the urban scale and on a rural scale, as you see here. And it can be seen on many different levels. It doesn't matter if it's a home or just a small entry lobby. This idea of filtered light and bringing it into the space is something that we're very passionate about. Additionally, and I think many of us in this profession, and I think many of the previous lectures really talk about this idea of technology and fabrication and an understanding of product and how we can interpret that into the space. These are renderings of a project that's under construction now and how we're fabricating and really perforating and filtering the vision from the user of the home from inside to outside, and then seeing it executed on a different scale and how we're literally taking that nature and fabricating it into the architecture, into the surfaces that we're molding and blending into the space. And then just again, how the space, using this idea of texture, materials, and bringing them together in a home, and then looking at a home and how we can create it and break it down, much like in some of the previous images, how we can compartmentalize our living spaces into the individual programs that exist within them, and then how we can interpret that onto a larger scale. This was an ideas project that we contemplated just so we could understand how the ideas of materiality, programmatic components could be explored on a larger scale in an urban environment, and then that's what led us into the project in New Orleans. Hurricane Rita and Katrina, I think, had a profound effect on many of us in this country. The images that we've seen from there have become something that we're all sort of immune to today. I mean, the events that have recently happened in Japan, in Haiti, the tornadoes in this country have really just almost hardened us to this idea of destruction of architecture. And I think as young, 6 years ago, when we were a bit younger than we were now, really trying to gain an understanding of how we could make our mark in architecture, when you see the level of destruction that happened to the built environment, you need to somehow react. And certainly the path of Katrina and Rita and what they did to New Orleans was something that I don't think any of us could have ever understood. The relevance of this slide, and I'll try to get the pointer out to explain to everybody who's not that familiar with New Orleans, This is Lake Pontchartrain. This is the Mississippi River coming down through here, and everything that's inside of the red line was essentially areas that flooded. Everything outside of that was what's considered the higher ground, and pre-World War II, those are the only areas of the city that were occupied. But this idea of density, this idea of infill in urban areas, was done irresponsibly. Dredging occurred, and irresponsible movement of land occurred, and houses were built in the very low-lying areas. And these were the sorts of images that we're faced with. And they're still today sort of mind-numbing to look at. And like I said before, we see them quite frequently again because there appears to be every year another natural disaster that happens. Initially, we submitted for a competition that was sponsored by Tulane University in Architectural Record. It was an ideas competition. And as a young practice, the way you sort of move out of one typology of work into another is by submitting to competitions and putting your best foot forward. This was called High Density and High Ground. It was a way to re-envision the way we could live along the edge of the Mississippi River on the earthen levee. And it dealt with a lot of these ideas of elevated green spaces and compartmentalized living conditions and green space parks that bordered the edge. And then Matt and I were fortunate enough we were one of the winners of that competition, and it brought us down to New Orleans, and these were the images we were faced with. And we didn't know what to make of them because they existed on every single block. And we felt that we needed to do more. There had to be something else we could do. We're architects, we didn't have deep enough pockets to write checks, so we felt as though we could donate our services. And that was when the competition was announced that was sponsored by Brad Pitt and Global Green, and we decided that we had invested all this energy in the previous one that we felt like it was a good opportunity for us to do this. The goal of the competition was to re-envision the development of an urban block and see how we could rebuild it for many of the characteristics that the previous speakers outlined, achieving net zero energy, incorporation of water efficiency, going for LEED Platinum, and really making a conscious outreach to the community. And doing all of this, integrating the best systems and performance characteristics of homes that could exist on an affordable level. And that was the real challenge of the project, how we could reconcile this idea of sustainability and affordability. Today, I think it's a far easier thing to do than it was then, but even 6 years ago, it was very difficult to contemplate on a smaller scale. Our initial approach, we decided to look at a master plan of the Holy Cross neighborhood, which bordered the earthen levee on the Mississippi, and see how we could rethink the way the urban blocks existed. They were, for the most part, completely devastated, except for the areas along the levee itself, and we realized that we didn't have an understanding of who was going to come back, how many people there was going to be, and how they were going to utilize these plots of land. So we created these green corridors that would really filter people and bring them out to the levee itself. And we defined what we termed this idea of an educational transect. If our urban block was to be a beacon for people to come to, we wanted to design it in such a way that it drew people to the site so that they could not only live there, work there, and play there, but they could also become knowledgeable about the practices that we were implementing. So they would filter their way through the site and make their way out into the earthen levee over this bridge that connect over the road, and it would be just a great connection point to that area. The program was to have originally 6 single-family homes, a community center, business incubation space, a daycare center, and an 18-unit apartment building. And it was created as a 2-part competition. So the initial part was there were 7 finalists that were selected. We went down to New Orleans. We had several meetings and presentations with community groups that were the few people that were on the ground making their way back to New Orleans. And they really inspired and created a lot of the ideas and direction for all of the competitors' projects. We really took an in-depth look at the typologies of homes that existed in New Orleans. There were shotgun camelback houses, very long, narrow structures that dealt with this idea of passive air cooling and front porches, and just really varied that scale and came up with what we called sort of a new progressive vernacularism for the New Orleans area. Then we were fortunate enough to actually win the competition through a series of presentations, and then we were faced with reality. We had to actually take these ideas and turn them into something that was affordable, could achieve the lofty goals of a net zero home, and have that be done on a very inexpensive level that could be done quickly. So things like fancy bridges that spanned over roadways onto earthen levees were very quickly cut out of the project just because they didn't make any sense. And the scope of the project and the scale, the homes were reduced down, the community center aspect was simplified, and the apartment buildings was also reduced in scale. And this was what the direction of the project looked like. We were still trying to anchor the corner to draw people in. We still maintained this idea of the educational transect, but it was more of a two-dimensional surface on the groundscape, and the homes took on a fairly regularized typology as they made their way down the streetscape, because we had to deal with the harsh realities of historic community boards and things like that were reviewing the project. The apartment building was, still achieved many of the goals of net zero. We had photovoltaic panels. These were envisioned to be sort of modular boxes that were stacked together and could be very quickly implemented and integrated and replicated throughout the community. And we were making, elements of bringing greenery into the space, all of which wasn't there before, but this idea of sort of lacing the buildings with greenery, something that does very well in New Orleans, we felt was a worthy cause. And then this was the initial renderings of the first home that was built, and I will turn it over to Matt, who will walk you through the status today.
So Andrew just walked you through what this project looked like on paper. And on paper, you can see architects, we like to have a lot of fun. We do some great renderings, we come up with some great design ideas, but then, like you said, we had to figure out how to build it. And that's where kind of the laboratory shifted, and that's where the discussion shifted, and we really went into essentially what was kind of a real R&D mode. I mean, this is where we were having very, very long multi-hour phone calls, conference calls with 20 people on them, once a week, with every type of professional on board, talking about how to make these homes perform the way that they needed to perform. So the goal initially was to have these all be net zero homes, and a lot of time and energy was spent on the first house. Now, the first house, the houses were built in 3 phases. It was the first house, the model house, then 2 more houses, and then 2 more houses after that. And the first house, like the first prototype of anything, is going to be incredibly expensive. It's going to take a lot of time to develop, and then you're going to study its performance. This house it was all of those things. It was expensive, it took a long time to develop, but then we got to study it. And what we learned through this whole process was that we were not only educating ourselves, but we were educating the community and educating the tradesmen, the local community in terms of the homeowners, and the local community in terms of the trade professionals who were down there, including things like Andrew said, simple things. Now you go to Home Depot and you see something like a tankless hot water heater. 5 years ago you didn't. So trying to explain that to a plumber and make him not kind of jump back or throw a high number at it because he was afraid of dealing with it, came a whole educational process that we worked through with this first home. And the supply chain today is beginning to change. You walk into Home Depot today, you do see LED light bulbs and tankless hot water heaters and stuff like that. But 5 years ago, those things didn't exist. So it was really a lot of kind of clawing our way through this house so that we could prove to everybody that a lot of the decisions that were made were smart decisions. You can see some of the other houses that are being built. Every material, every system that went into this house was analyzed very, very thoroughly. And then as the rest of the site got built out, including a monitoring system. So now years later, we can look back and we can actually monitor all of the energy consumption, water consumption, and usage of the home. The interesting thing, though, is that as the houses got built, 2 more on the left, the model home was in the middle, 2 more on the left, and then the 2 more on the right, we got closer and closer to our goal of building an affordable, sustainable home. So the next 2 were a little less expensive, and then the final 2 were actually built for the market price. So in terms of building an affordable net zero home, we finally, after this kind of long process, achieved our goals. And then ultimately the last piece of the puzzle, or one of the last pieces of the puzzle, which is now hopefully going to start construction soon, is the community center. The community center anchors the north part of the site, and what they want to do is use it as a means of getting resources and materials to the community. So all of the lessons learned in these houses, they now want to transfer, take that information, carry it forward. And for us, walking away from this project, we're still involved 5 years later. It goes slowly. We're in a new economy. Fundraising is different. Getting money for the apartment building and the tax credits, which is on the south part of the site, will happen hopefully eventually. But right now, the goal is to focus on the community center. But we are in a new time. And one of the things for us that we took away from this experience was a number of lessons that we learned. One, that if you don't have access to professionals, and here we had lived in a world, and you saw, Andrew showed you the work that we've built our practice on and cut our teeth on. We live in a world where people have access to professionals. They can afford to hire professionals on the residential scale, and they get a great product because of it. But 98% of the people in this country don't have access to professionals. And therefore, there's a huge gap between the materials and performance that they can get through a professional and the materials and performance they get on their own. So for us, the carry forward was to say, how can we leverage our ideas? How can we leverage our experience into a platform that is highly scalable and gets better design and better performance out to more people? So we've launched Sprucebox, and again, we're celebrating kind of anniversaries for us. This was launched just 2 weeks ago. So we're very, if you make it 2 weeks, and yeah. But really launching it on the heels of the New Orleans experience, because when we talked to people down there, they were willing to listen, they were willing to learn, but they wanted information, and they wanted information that they could understand and digest in quick sound bites. They didn't want to go to the internet and Google solar hot water and then get bombarded with thousands of pages and have no idea what they meant. So they wanted information that they could distill, that was coherent, and that they could make an intelligent decision on. So Sprucebox, sprucebox.com, you go on. We're starting very simply with the 2 areas of the home that most people care about, which is the kitchen and the bath. And it allows people it gives them access to design. You go on, given lots of choices. You pick, you watch things change. If any of you have built a car online, that's fundamentally the idea. It's putting power in the hands of the homeowner, because not every homeowner has access to professionals, whether they don't know them or budget-wise or whoever it is. So they can go on and they get all the information that they need. And for us, it's a way of carrying some of these ideas forward, giving people better design, more information, carrying it through the different areas. This is the bath. You can make different selections. Basically, you get how it works. It's very simple. And trying to say that we know that the professionals of this world are a resource. But we, the professionals of this world, especially on a residential scale, the projects you saw earlier, the institutional projects, the commercial projects, the tall towers, those always have teams of engineers, teams of architects, and that's great. They're thinking through those projects. But how do we get that information down to the 98% of the homeowners who, frankly, would benefit from it? They would benefit from lower cost energy, or lower energy bills, more healthy environments. They would benefit from a better understanding of how their home operates and better performance. So for us, we want to take Sprucebox, continue to build it out, carry it forward so that we can begin to answer those questions and become a place, a kind of a go-to place where anybody with a question about how their home performs, what they should do, and where to find good, coherent information can go to start their journey moving forward. We can't build it for you. We can't hold your hand all the way. But what we can do is provide a mouthpiece for the profession to get that information to people who, frankly, would benefit from it in a tremendous way. So that is, for us, our carry forward. That is, for us, the lesson we learned from New Orleans, is that we do possess a tremendous amount of information, and we need to do a better job as a profession of getting it out to people. Thank you very much.